After setting the tone in our Insight speech, I'm delighted to now open the discussion on green hydrogen in Germany with Benedikt Messner and Ingmar Helmke. Benedikt is Senior Vice President at Uniper Global Commodities and brings 25 years of experience in merchant energy, mostly at E.ON, with a little detour via Energisa in Turkey and now at Uniper. Ingmar is Senior Vice President at Macquarie Green Investment Group and has worked for more than 15 years in finance and since 10 years in renewables investment at Aquila Capital and since a bit more than a year at Green Investment Group. We are very pleased to have you here in person. The opportunities to talk face-to-face have become so rare over the last year that it's an even greater pleasure to talk to you in person rather than virtually. Prior to the panel, in the panel preparation, we joked about the need to check whether our suits still fit, but looking around me, I think we have overcome that hurdle between months of home office and in-person meetings. Before we start, some housekeeping. As always, your questions are very welcome. Please post them in the chat and we'll make sure to reply after the session. Good, let's get started. Can I both ask you for a short introductory statement? It'd be great if you could introduce Uniper or Green Investment Group and what they do in the space of hydrogen, and then also some words on your exact role and how that relates to hydrogen. Ingmar, do you want to start?
Sure, thanks, Lisa. Thanks for having me. As you said, Ingmar Helmke, Senior Vice President within Macquarie Green Investment Group. The Green Investment Group is part of the Macquarie Group. We are a dedicated investor into the energy transition. We currently do have a development pipeline of some 25 gigawatts of renewable energy assets. We have invested some 22 billions of euro in capital, and we do have a dedicated team of 450 people globally. I am covering for the London-based team the German market, and as we all expect Germany to play a very important role in the transition towards the hydrogen economy, my involvement into hydrogen, which is a big journey we are just embarking to. I think the entire industry is embarking to on this journey, and Macquarie GIG is determined to play a very good role into making this happen.
No. Fantastic. Over to you, Benedikt.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. Same here. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a rare occasion to move around and travel in those times, but you set the stage perfectly, and I really feel safe here. Uniper is as most of you know, a utility where we set ourselves the target to empower the energy evolution. We want to become climate neutral by 2035. And we see hydrogen as a key enabler of that energy transition. Personally, I've been working in the energy space, merchant energy as you called it, for the last almost more than 2 decades. And it's fascinating for me now to, bridge over from the trading transactions to the renewable space and now bridging over into hydrogen. It almost feels to me like we're extending the value chain from renewables to green hydrogen, but certainly not only green hydrogen. So it's an exciting place to be. It's an exciting time that I'm happy to be in.
That's great. Good. Then let's start with hydrogen production. Germany has set ambitious targets, 5 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity by 2030. But as Alex pointed out earlier, the levelized cost of hydrogen, if we compare that across countries, Germany fares fairly badly. If we compare, for example, to blue hydrogen from neighboring European countries such as France or the Netherlands, and also green hydrogen, for example, from Morocco, and this is taking into account transport. So with this in mind, will we see large-scale green hydrogen production in Germany, or is that rather something that will scale abroad and we will be depending on imports in Germany?
Yeah, well, if you follow the news and the press releases, it seems like there will be green hydrogen all over the place. A lot of activity, a lot of what you call the hype even to get things moving. And I do think what we'll see in Germany is hydrogen which is centered around industrial clusters. That's what really makes sense. You save on transport and you use sources that are available, whether it's offshore or onshore, or potentially solar even. In terms of costs, I do think there's places where in Europe, but also outside Europe, where you find better preconditions, keeping in mind, as Alex said, that most of the cost of hydrogen is determined on the green side by the cost of power. We certainly see places in Europe like the Nordics, as Ingmar knows, or Spain, potentially Italy, where the LCOH or the LCOE, determining the LCOH are far lower than the ones in Germany. So I do think there will be some production we'll see centered around maybe refineries, chemical parks, but I also think that given the high targets of installed capacity on electrolyzer in Germany or hydrogen demand in Germany, we won't get that done in Germany only. Yeah. So we'll see some imports next to domestic productions. And in terms of domestic production, keep in mind that a lot of regulations still need to fall in place to enable the LCOH to be comparable to LCOH elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think, Ingmar, should be Germany's role with regards to green hydrogen production?
Well, I concur with everything what Benedikt has said. I think it is very unlikely that Germany in the long run will be a major hub for the production of green hydrogen. And that comes for the sheer fact that the levelized cost of hydrogen are to the most part driven by the levelized cost of energy. And it's quite clear that where natural resources, where the richer natural resources, that the levelized costs of energy will be and are much lower than in Germany, and that will drive the price for the levelized cost of hydrogen. Hydrogen, again, is a commodity, so no one will pay a premium for hydrogen coming from a domestic resource. Hence, I believe in the long run, the hydrogen production will take place outside of Germany, except for where it makes sense, close to industrial clusters, because you save transportation and storage costs. Having said that, I still believe, and you asked me for the role Germany should play in getting the hydrogen economy started, and this is where we are. We are very much at the beginning. Yeah. Though, as Benedikt said, if you look into mainstream media, you could get the impression that we are already there, and that's not at all the case. Yeah. We are still in the phase where the basics, where the basis for embarking to this journey needs to be set by regulators, by politicians. Yeah. And I believe that Germany, as a highly industrialized country, which is determined to decarbonize those parts of the economy which need to be net zero by 2050. So there's no way around decarbonizing the industry. So I think it makes a lot of sense for Germany to to foster or to establish initiatives for electrolyzers in the beginning, in order to gain knowledge, in order to gain the technology and get the excellence in this. But the in terms of hydrogen production, the long-term goal for Germany needs to export technology, export know-how, yeah, and profit thereby from the hydrogen economy. I think in the long run, Germany should develop excellence also in the midstream part, transportation and storage, and above all in the downstream part, so the end use of hydrogen. And this is where Germany will be very strong. And in order to be able to develop excellence in the end use of hydrogen, you need to get it started somewhere. But I think we need to be sure in Germany that we are not running into a situation like for solar PV, where we start an industry which is completely dependent on subsidies, and that will probably never change in Germany if you're realistic.
Okay, so I think there's agreement on the fact that there is some production in Germany, maybe centered around industrial clusters, but a large share will come from imports. But nevertheless, we should be excellent in the technology and export that. Export technology, import hydrogen. So
and that doesn't need to be bad. I mean, Germany has always been dependent on energy imports, right? And that's not going to change for hydrogen.
Future. Absolutely, I briefly want to talk about imports and international cooperation. So we've seen that, we've heard that the first projects abroad receive funding from the €2 billion bucket from the National Hydrogen Strategy. I think there's a 8 million project, fairly small, for a pilot project on synthetic fuel from wind power in Chile. Siemens Energy and Porsche are involved. Then ThyssenKrupp also received some funding to develop a prototype for an modular alkaline electrolyzer, which is to be deployed in Saudi Arabia. And I think that shows, and is also like a good development, that German companies are looking at opportunities elsewhere. And I'd be curious to also know in which countries you are involved in hydrogen projects at Uniper, and if you can say that what type of projects that are, so looking a little bit at the value chain, so rather like upstream or in applications and so on. And then was the country a strategic decision, or is that rather an opportunistic approach at that point?
Well, I think it's easy to tell. First of all, you look at the map and especially for green hydrogen, find out where the lowest LCOE, and as I said before, there's better countries or countries where you get hold of renewables cheaper than you do in Germany. So you start with that map. But then you also look into infrastructure, and so we're pursuing at Uniper projects ourselves, where in Germany, in those industrial clusters or in the vicinity, we try to establish electrolyzers, but also I have to tell you that we have some electrolyzers installed since 5 or 6 years already, and tested the technology. So we're building on that experience. So we'll look into domestic asset development. We'll look into international ones. We have a project in the north of Scotland, for example. There's projects in the Netherlands where we try to identify how and what technology best to use. And let's not forget, there's not only green hydrogen,
of course,
but there's other means and infrastructure and facilities where you could go into blue, for example. So we're pursuing that. I have to tell you that we're probably technology agnostic. We just want this industry started. But we also know, as you pointed out before, Ingmar, that we have to import. And Germany does import, I think 2/3 of its prime energy demand is being imported as we speak. So there's countries like the ones you mentioned, maybe in South America or in the Middle East, where I think just recently there was an announcement that Abu Dhabi now goes big on hydrogen, both blue and green. So certainly as Uniper, we not only want to develop assets ourselves, but we also know, based on our tradition as being a global energy merchant, that we can bring hydrogen into Europe. 2 questions around that need to be solved, probably more, but how can we certify the product? How can we make sure that a product that comes from overseas is accepted here and finds its market? And number 2, if you talk about transport by ship, what is the fuel that those ships use for propulsion, and can we still then have a full value chain of green and zero carbon, or how can we get rid of any diluting factors through transport? So still a lot to solve, but Uniper, as much as anybody else, is now trying to find ways and seek to get green in its purest forms into the system.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think one question that's also still unsolved is how to transport it via ship, like as pure hydrogen, difficult. So you need liquefied
or and turn it into different commodities or carriers.
Yeah, exactly. Interesting. Ingmar, how about you? Do you have a clear strategic focus on hydrogen at Green Investment Group? And one additional point for you is, if you like, it'd also be highly interesting to hear a little bit about you think about risks and associated financing costs in different countries. If we talk, for example, of Chile or Saudi Arabia.
Well, Macquarie is a global company, right? So my particular focus is Germany and the EMEA region. So this is my home turf. Yeah. This is, but I can tell you, Macquarie's origins are in Australia. Macquarie is actively involved already at this stage in large hydrogen projects where we are about to build renewable energy plants of a dimension which is unknown and possibly probably not possible in Europe. And this is coming back to the point, you need to produce as well where the levelized costs of energy are most competitive. We do have a very strong presence also in the North American market, where, by the way, the topic of blue hydrogen is much more important than it is, at least for Germany, because you do have rich natural gas resources in North America. And within Europe, we are currently actively involved in initiatives in the UK. Of course, that's our home turf as Green Investment Group, in the Netherlands, and we are looking and having very promising discussions in Germany as well.
Okay, interesting. Maybe let's continue to talk a bit about investing in hydrogen.
Yeah.
Most pilot projects are done by corporates with big balance sheets, and then on top government support. At that point, or at that stage of the hydrogen beginning, or emerging right now, what role do you see for an investor like Green Investment Group at that point? And maybe just to add on that, what are the criteria that make a hydrogen project, investable for you?
Yeah. That's a good point. So I fully agree. So far we are seeing foremost pilot projects where it is about subsidizing the sheer capex. I think, and Macquarie GIG is in the business of taking on entrepreneurial opportunities and transforming it into infrastructure-like assets with a predictable cash flow, and that is what we are doing, right? This realization of and de-risking of opportunities into infrastructure assets.
Yeah.
I think, to be realistic, the hydrogen so far, there are no assets like this available which would meet the characteristics of an infrastructure investment. Because in order to do so, what you need to do is you need to have a predictable cash flow, and that comes down to the fact that you need offtake for your product, which will be hydrogen. There is no hydrogen market as of yet, right? I mean, 90% of the global hydrogen production is captive, which means that those who use it for ammonia production or for the petrochemical industry, they produce their own hydrogen demand on site. So there is no trade.
Yeah.
And this is what Benedikt and I mean by this is very much at the beginning. The regulatory framework, but also the market needs to develop. It's not there yet.
Yeah.
Still, to answer your question, as Macquarie GIG, we do have the ability to still get engaged at very early stages of those project initiatives. What are we looking for? We need to have a clear route to market. If this is not yet established, because there is no offtake agreement yet in place. We need to have a clear understanding where this can be in the future, or we need to have a regulatory framework handling this point of the offtake. Second, we need partners. It's all about partners. We need strong partners like Uniper or others, and we need scalability. So you can start small, but we need to have a vision and a clear path forward how to scale this up. And that's what's required. And if a project initiative meets these three characteristics, we are very interested in getting involved, not just with capital, but actively involved. We are an active investor, and rather than just someone who would finance such a project and be passive.
Okay, so I take the three dimensions basically: route to market, partners, and scale is the other crucial factors. Alex has talked about PPAs and pointed out the potential and advantages of renewable PPAs to procure the electricity for electrolysis. Would PPAs be also the preferred option from an investor's point of view, or could you also imagine other procurement strategies that would work for you?
Yeah. So if you look, it depends. If you want to really tap the source of the really low cost of capital from institutional investors, those market players are looking into infrastructure asset as a replacement for bonds, right? They are looking into predictable cash flows. So, and I've mentioned the necessity of an offtake agreement for your hydrogen, which is your product. But on the other hand, your fuel will be electricity. So in my eyes, it makes a lot of sense to have it both hedged, because a PPA is nothing else than a price hedge. So and Macquarie is looking to structure projects, right? And on a standalone basis, for us, it is always beneficial if a project is economically viable on a standalone basis. So I would say that yes, we would probably want to have the fuel, the electricity hedged. And we do have also the capabilities in structuring those hedges ourselves. Or you would partner with someone like Uniper, who has more means to balance and to look for a portfolio approach.
Yeah, and that is exactly what I'm interested to hear from you as a utility. Uniper does not necessarily need a PPA, but it's your core competence basically to direct electricity to where it is needed. So can you maybe share, maybe it's too early for project examples, but can you share how you think internally about procuring the electricity for electrolysis?
Yeah, sure. And it was interesting to see what Alex had said earlier. We're at the beginning, and what we now need to figure out is what's the best combination of electricity to be fed into an electrolyzer by PPAs, for example, or direct lines from dedicated wind parks, for example, in Germany, figuring out what the best running regime is for that electrolyzer, be that the 47% load factor, lower, higher. How can we use excess power from the grid? Would regulations still allow that to be green? Just think about the RED II directive stating that you need to really only supply an electrolyzer with renewable power at all times. So there's still a lot of complication in there, so that currently we don't see an advantage of a portfolio, because we don't know whether if we feed an electrolyzer from our portfolio, that's deemed to be green or accepted, so that the end product is accepted. So I do think there's a lot of work that we currently put into it, but not only in Germany, in other markets as well. It's how to optimize the supply of the electrolyzer. And it has to do a lot with regulations, levies, is an electrolyzer an end customer Is it something else? Which levers apply? So that's what I think in the beginning I said, that regulations need to come in place.
Yeah.
The government needs to review taxes, levies, etc., and what applies here, just to get it started. And with respect to your comments, Ingmar, I said, let's not forget about the ultimate customer, the demand. So where's that demand security? Where's the offtake of the product, whether it's hydrogen in its purest form, or ammonia, or methanol? Yeah. I don't see those yet lining up as much as I see companies like ours lining up and being active and interested to get the hydrogen economy started. But you turn to a refinery and you propose to pay double for what they currently pay for their feedstock, and same goes for the chemicals industry, and they say, well, yes, but come back later. Yeah. So I think that's something that needs to get kickstarted, the demand side, and we're exploring through our contacts in sales, through our customer contacts. We're exploring that momentarily, but we don't see customers lining up and signing up for that unless there is more, carbon abatement, the costs are higher, the regulations fall in place, the need to decarbonize becomes more and more, visible, tangible by the industry. So a lot that needs to come in place still before probably Ingmar gets his first approval for an investment case.
Yeah, I think that's was a very good introduction to the topic that I want to talk about next. I think there is consensus among us and in the entire industry that hydrogen, especially green hydrogen, needs support. Also, but not only to solve the hen and egg problem of demand, supply, and transport and storage infrastructure, and also to bring the technology costs down. You've already started talking about the main hurdles of what you're seeing. So for you, what would be the most important regulations that needs to come into place?
I do think we should look at this from a European perspective, or maybe even broader if you talk about imports from further away, to make sure that there's support to get this industry kickstarted, and that support may be supporting CapEx, but I wouldn't want to see stranded assets there after 3 years because the product is still too expensive. So I guess we would also have to have regulations in place that allow us to support the product in the first years maybe, and that could be through CFDs or direct different support, or maybe something like feed-in tariffs, but the OPEX side needs also to be supported for some time. I think that's a very important case. And then certainly, as I pointed out earlier, what is it that we're talking about? What's the carbon content of the hydrogen? How does it help industry to decarbonize? What purpose does it have, and what problem does it solve in decarbonization? Whether that's in the chemical sector or in refineries or steel making as the first obvious ones that I see as industry to embark on that hydrogen journey.
Yeah. Ingmar, do you want to add to that point?
It's hard to add something because I fully concur, and I think it's just to stress again that a one-time grant for financing CapEx electrolyzer will not help the investment case, because of the fact that the cost of hydrogen are mainly driven by the cost of electricity and green electricity if you want to have green hydrogen. So I fully concur. We need a stimulus on the demand side in order to gap, because for the end user there is demand for hydrogen, but there is not yet a market. But there is demand. But those consumers of hydrogen, ammonia refineries, to a lesser extent steel industry with direct iron reduction, for them it's a commodity. They will probably, and they are up against global competition. So there is, even if they would want to pay a premium for green hydrogen, they probably can't. So and someone needs to fill this commercial gap. And I think there are very strong alliances between financial investors like ourselves who are willing to start spending euros on very early stage initiatives, industrial players and utilities. So the willingness is there. Everyone would like to get it going. Everyone shares the vision and understands why it makes a lot of sense and why hydrogen indeed can be a game changer, because it's sort of the missing puzzle piece. It's the interlink between the electricity markets and the natural gas markets. So I think the vision is big. Everyone wants to play a part in it, and we are determined to do so. But I think without subsidies and without a regulatory regime giving certainty for a long run, you don't want to invest in stranded assets, as you said. The market won't take off.
Okay. Yeah, I think one crucial fact is, and that's what you've also mentioned, there will be no market for green hydrogen unless we know about the carbon content of hydrogen that is on the market. We read that investors increasingly take into account ESG, so environmental, social and governance criteria in their investments, either as an intrinsic motivation or due to external pressure maybe. The European Union is currently finalizing the EU taxonomy, which is basically a framework for classifying green or sustainable investment. For hydrogen, the rule is that 5.8 grams of 5.8 tons of carbon emissions per ton of hydrogen are considered sustainable, and the electricity that is fed into the electrolyzer can have up to 100 grams of carbon per kilowatt hour, which means it's only either renewables or nuclear. So basically, if hydrogen is sustainable under the EU taxonomy, it's either green hydrogen made from renewables or nuclear, or blue hydrogen through gas reforming, that is where at least 50% of the emissions are captured and stored. With that in mind, how do you look at hydrogen projects, and how does this sustainable finance debate influence your investment? And also, as a second question to that, how do you think about blue hydrogen at Green Investment Group?
Yeah. So as Green Investment Group, we are in the tradition of the Green Investment Bank, which was founded by the UK, and so our mission is to accelerate the energy transition. We take ESG matters and sustainability matters that sit at the core of everything we do. We actually do have a internal certification process, and I would not even be allowed to, with very strict and rigorous standards, and I would not even be allowed as an investment manager to invest into a project which is not meeting these criterias. So for us, I think it's fair to say that it's for us, it's not just labeling. We are living this, and I wouldn't say that this has been done by pressure. It is more the conviction. And I would say it's the conviction of the finance industry more and more. It becomes mainstream, and that's a really, really good development.
I agree.
And I think it is very yesterday to think of the financial industry that we just care about profit. If you care about sustainable profit, if you want to still make profits in 50 years from now, there's no way around ESG, environmental matters, and hence it's more about operating sustainable rather than, you know, am I a tree hugger or not? You don't need to be a tree hugger to be convinced that you need to become green. And I think that is not even controversial anymore. I've just read an interview in a newspaper with Rolf Schmitz of RWE, and he concurs with the need of the entire industry becoming green. And I would say that Benedikt is sitting here also full of conviction. The question is, what is a good and sustainable way forward? I mean, you can't stop big industries. They play an important role, and you can't stop it So you need to have a very reasonable way forward, but I think we are all determined to change and be part of the change, and the utilities are as well. It's not very controversial anymore.
Yeah, I think the time is maybe still somewhat controversial sometimes.
The timing issue is controversial, of course, but I think that we can all agree on the direction. And the second part of your question.
The second part of the question was, how do you think about investing in blue hydrogen?
Blue hydrogen, yeah. I mean, I think, to be frank, I do have colleagues sitting in New York, and they will probably give you a completely different answer than me, covering the German market and being German, right? Yeah. I think for Germany, it's pretty clear that it has to be green hydrogen. It's very easy for us to say as well, because we don't have any natural gas resources, right? Yeah. So it's like, why would we invest into an interim technology which is not as carbon neutral as green hydrogen? So for Germany, I think the answer is easy. For other countries, even in Europe, like the UK or the Netherlands, who do have natural gas resources, it's less easy to answer. And I would, and there are many good aspects actually in blue hydrogen, which I do see, at least as an interim technology. And you know, and if you take into account the dimension of renewable energy, which is required in order to get the green hydrogen economy going, I think there's no way around blue hydrogen, at least as an interim technology. Yeah. And I'm just encouraging everyone to have an open discussion around it. Rather, there shouldn't be any, you know, you should consider all good arguments. Having said that, being German, I do have, of course, a preference for green hydrogen, but I wouldn't say that blue hydrogen is an evil thing. There are many, many good aspects which you need to take into sober considerations.
Yeah, I think it's maybe important to say it's not blue hydrogen now and green later, because we have to start with green also to get costs down and so on. But combining the two is maybe good also to have some volume in the market and so on.
Plus, I think you can't stop nations like the US or the Netherlands or the UK and I think France from producing blue hydrogen. They will do it anyway, right? So I think we have to live with the fact, and we have to bring down the cost of green hydrogen, which will be much easier if there is the demand for hydrogen already, right? So I think that is why in the long run I think it will be green hydrogen in any case if carbon prices keep on increasing, which will be the case. So it's not an either or. I fully agree. But I think as an interim technology, blue hydrogen can play an important role in getting the
Benedict,
Sorry.
No. Benedict, I'd be curious to know from you how you think about certification, because I think for you it's less a topic of sustainable finance or so on, but there's other reasons why you as a utility are interested in transparency.
Well, transparency is key here, and we share an industry. We've been working in the renewables industry, and we know about the certificates of origin, the guarantees of origin, how important it is. And we see there's a market for those instruments right now. So I see that the same setup will be seen or will be established on the hydrogen side. We just need to know what products we deal with. And therefore, I think a market for hydrogen and the market for hydrogen certificates will evolve rather quicker than we think now. Just to make sure we fill and we can meet the demand of individual customers. And currently, you know, in the renewable space, you see German municipalities, Stadtwerke, who really want local certificates, renewable power that's produced next doors. So there's demand for exactly that, and not for certificates from the Nordics or from Spain. So I do think we will have that different demand also in the future. Some hydrogen with some content will work in decarbonization for that industry. Other industry will have a higher demand for a specific type of hydrogen with an maybe even lower carbon content. But coming back to blue, certainly will have many different ways and to produce hydrogen. And I think what matters to me would be everything is better than the status quo. With all those measures, whether it's green or blue or turquoise even, we do reduce the carbon footprint, and that's what really counts. And if at the end, in 10 years' time, there's only one technology because costs have come down so rapidly, so may be it. But just, I wish that economy would be started, that industry would be started as easy as possible. And let's not forget, if we talk too much about hydrogen only, there's other ways to decarbonize. Yeah. There's other forms to help an industry to decarbonize. And hydrogen is certainly not the only way to get there, but it's I agree with you, one of the most promising ones since decades or maybe centuries that people have been talking about hydrogen.
Okay. I think we could go on for much longer, but I'm afraid we must come to an end. I think one last question to both of you, and please answer in one word or one short sentence. We have federal elections coming up in September. If you had one wish on what the outgoing government should do in the remaining months, what would this be?
I'll let
Ingmar go first. Any time to compress.
One word is a challenge, but I try to keep it short. I think the current government has just enacted the amendment to the Renewables Act. I don't think that this will change a lot. It's not a real reform. So. But if this is as good as it gets with the current government, I think that will be a task for the coming government. Okay. So I would rather focus on defeating COVID.
Okay, that's
until September, right? I think.
Okay, that
would be my wish.
Nothing beats that, Ingmar. Nothing beats that. To deal with first things first. You're right. But in terms of a wider perspective, I would wish that. The regulation would come into play and be helpful to the kickstart of that industry. So I do think there's a goodwill in the industry, both on the investment side, on the facilitation side, on the transport, on the integration, optimization of the energy system. But that doesn't work without a regulation in place, a time scale that you can rely upon. And ideally, not only on the German level, but on the European level, or even thinking big on a global level, like a global alliance for hydrogen that's come into play.
Yeah. Excellent. Benedikt, Ingmar, thank you very much for taking the time today. It was truly great talking to you about such a hot topic as hydrogen is these days. And of course, thank you to our listeners who didn't shy away from another hour spent in front of a screen, but joined virtually. And as it falls to me to close Aurora's German Renewables Week 2021, thank you to everyone who dialed in over the course of the week. It was a pleasure to see you all virtually, and hopefully we meet in person the next time again. As always, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us at Aurora. And I would also like to take the opportunity to thank our premium partner, Osborne Clarke, our supporting partner, Uniper, and our media partners, Background, Tagesspiegel, and Foresight Climate and Energy. Have a great day, everyone, and take care in those unusual times.